My name is Grace Bennett, and at 68 years old, I've learned how to take care of just about everything in my life on my own. I didn't expect that to change today. I was sitting in the waiting room at St. Mary's Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri, clutching the little folder the surgeon had just handed me. My hands felt damp, and my heart wouldn't slow down. 10 minutes earlier, Dr. McCarthy had looked me in the eye and said the words I'd been dreading. It's time for a total hip replacement. Grace. He was calm and matter-of-fact, explaining how the arthritis in my right hip had progressed. The x-rays showed it plain as day, bone rubbing on bone. No cartilage left. I'd been limping for months, telling myself it was just old age. But I couldn't get through a grocery store trip without pain anymore. He told me I could wait, but I'd only make things harder for myself. I'd nodded like it was no big deal, but as I walked, hobbled out to the waiting room, the weight of it hit me. This wasn't a quick in and out. This was major surgery. And when they put you under anesthesia, you can't just pick up your purse afterward and drive yourself home. The hospital had been clear. I'd need someone to drive me home and stay the first night, just in case. That's when I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen longer than it should have. I don't like asking for help. I've been a widow for 12 years. I still mow my own lawn, shovel my own driveway, and climb the stepladder to clean the gutters. My neighbors tell me I'm so independent, like it's a medal I'm supposed to polish and wear proudly. But this wasn't about pride. It was about necessity. I opened a text to my son, Ray, and his wife, Stephanie. I kept it short, so it wouldn't sound like I was making a big deal out of it. Surgery's on the 15th. Just need someone to drive me home. I hit send and watched the little bubble move across the screen until the message marked as delivered. Seconds later, the word read appeared. Both of them had seen it. I waited. A minute passed, then 5. People came and went around me, someone pushing their husband in a wheelchair, a mother carrying a toddler with a bandaged arm, an elderly man arguing with the receptionist about insurance. Still nothing from Ray or Stephanie. My eyes drifted back to my phone. I told myself they might be busy. Maybe Ray was in a meeting at work. Maybe Stephanie was driving. They'd reply when they could. Another minute passed. Still nothing. That old familiar ache settled in my chest, the one I felt more times than I care to count. Not anger exactly. More like that quiet disappointment that makes your stomach feel hollow. I slipped my phone back into my purse and straightened in the hard waiting room chair. This was exactly why I hated asking for help. If you don't ask, you can't be let down. I thought about the years since Frank passed. 12 years of making every decision alone. 12 years of managing the bills, keeping up the house, fixing the leaking roof, and handling car repairs. If I got sick, I made my own soup. If something broke, I either fixed it myself or called someone to do it. Ray lives 4 hours away in Kansas City now. He's married, busy with work, and from what I can tell, spends most weekends at Stephanie's parents' lake house. They visit on holidays if their schedules work out. I send them birthday cards and small gifts, just like I do for the grandkids. I never complain. I was raised to believe that if you can stand, walk, and put a meal on the table, you don't bother people with your problems. My mother lived by that rule. So do I. But sitting there in the waiting room, I realized something I didn't like admitting. Sometimes you just can't do it all yourself. The woman across from me was telling her daughter about the ride arrangements for her own surgery. "Mike's picking me up," she said. "He's taking the whole day off work." I smiled at her, but inside I felt a pang. I pulled my phone out again, checking for a reply. Nothing. I put it away. Again, the receptionist called my name to sign the final scheduling papers. I limped over, confirmed the date, February 15th, and took the folder she handed me. Make sure you've got a ride home, Mrs. Bennet, she reminded me. We can't release you otherwise. I'll figure something out, I told her, forcing a smile. Walking out into the crisp winter air, I felt the Missouri wind cut right through my coat. My hip throbbed as I crossed the parking lot, each step reminding me that this surgery wasn't optional. When I got into my car, I sat there for a moment before starting the engine. I pulled my phone out one more time. The message still sat there, read but unanswered. I told myself it was fine, that I'd manage. I'd always managed. But as I sat there in that hospital parking lot, the truth pressed in. I wasn't 25 anymore. I wasn't even 55. I was 68 years old, about to have a surgeon cut into my hip, and my only child couldn't or wouldn't write back. I put the car in gear and drove home, but the silence from that one little message followed me every mile. If you've ever sent a message and just watched the screen stay silent, then you know how this feels. Like this video, share it, because too many of us know this story, and pretending we don't is exactly why it keeps happening. I didn't always do everything alone. There was a time when I had someone to share the load with. Frank and I were married for 38 years. We built our life in a small brick house here in Springfield. He worked for the electric company, and I was a clerk at the library. We raised our son, Ray, together, and even when money was tight, we found a way to make things work. Frank could fix just about anything, and I handled the bills and the planning. We were a team. Then, one quiet Sunday morning, that team ended. Frank had been outside trimming the hedge. He came in, poured a glass of water, and the next thing I knew, he was on the kitchen floor. The doctors said it was a massive stroke. He was gone before the ambulance even got to the hospital. The first few weeks after his funeral were a blur. People stopped by, dropped off casseroles, and told me to call if you need anything. I never did. Everyone has their own lives, and I figured it was my job to keep moving. Ray was 20 at the time, halfway through his junior year of college. I didn't want him to worry about me, so I made sure the bills were paid, the lawn was mowed, and the fridge stayed full. I took on a second job at the grocery store in the evenings so I could keep helping him with tuition. When he'd come home on breaks, I'd cook his favorites, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and ask about his classes. I never let him see me cry. If I felt tears coming, I'd excuse myself to the laundry room or the bathroom. I thought I was protecting him. After graduation, Ray moved to Kansas City for work. That's where he met Stephanie. She was polite the first few times we met, but it didn't take long to see she wasn't one for small-town visits. They married, bought a house near her parents, and that became their world. The holidays were maybe if their schedules lined up. Phone calls got shorter. Still, I told myself they were busy building their own lives. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who clung to her grown child. So I stayed busy, too. Over time, people started calling me the strong one. My neighbor, Betty, once said, "Grace, you're tougher than nails." At church, someone told me they admired how self-reliant I was. The truth was, no one ever offered help. The compliments were just a way of excusing themselves from showing up. I learned to fix things Frank used to handle: leaky faucets, loose cabinet doors, a lawnmower that wouldn't start. I drove myself to urgent care the day I slipped on ice and broke my wrist. The nurse asked who could take me home, and I said, "No one." I drove myself. I signed out with my good hand and managed. When the gutters clogged 2 summers ago, I got out the ladder and cleaned them myself. My sister called while I was up there. I told her what I was doing, and she laughed, saying, "Only you, Grace." She didn't offer to come help. No one did. I kept my routines: mowing the yard in the spring, raking leaves in the fall, baking pies for the church fundraiser every Thanksgiving. If something hurt, I took a couple of ibuprofen and carried on. There were nights when the house felt too quiet. I'd sit in my recliner with a book, but I'd find myself reading the same paragraph over and over without taking it in. I'd wonder if Ray remembered the little things, how I used to stay up late sewing patches on his jeans for the next day, or the way Frank and I sat on the porch swing every summer evening until the mosquitoes chased us inside. Sometimes I'd think about calling him just to talk, but I didn't want to be the lonely mom interrupting their dinner. So I'd make tea instead and tell myself I was fine. That's how the years passed, me telling myself I was fine, even when I wasn't. People believed it because I never gave them a reason not to. I carried groceries, hauled trash cans to the curb, shoveled snow, and kept the roof over my head. But sitting in my car after that hospital appointment, staring at that unanswered text, I felt the weight of all those years. I built this life where no one expected me to need help, and now I really did. I didn't want to admit it out loud, but the truth was clear. For the first time since Frank died, I wasn't sure I could manage on my own. The pain didn't happen all at once. It started with a little stiffness in the mornings. I'd get out of my recliner and feel a tug in my right hip, something I thought would ease up once I moved around. Most days it did. I told myself it was just age. Everyone my age had aches and pains. But over the next year, the tug turned into a deep, dull ache that stayed with me all day. I found myself holding onto the edge of the counter when I stood up, giving myself a second before I took the first step. I still did my chores, mowed the lawn, carried groceries in from the car, but afterward, I'd need to sit with a heating pad just to get the throbbing to settle down. By this past fall, things had gotten worse. It wasn't just stiffness anymore. I was limping without meaning to. The simple act of getting out of my favorite recliner took effort. I'd plant my hands on the armrests, push with my good leg, and pray my right hip didn't lock up before I could straighten. One Sunday after church, I was in the fellowship hall pouring coffee when Mabel, a friend from my Bible study group, looked at me and said, "Grace, you're walking like my brother before he had his hip replaced." I laughed it off, but her words stuck in my mind. Finally, I made an appointment with my primary doctor, Dr. Lopez. He'd been my doctor for over 20 years, so he knew I wasn't one to come in unless something was really bothering me. He had me walk across the room, then pressed along my hip joint and asked me to move my leg different ways. I winced more than once. "Grace," he said, "I'm sending you for x-rays. I don't want you living with this pain. If we can fix it." The x-ray tech slid a heavy apron over me and positioned my leg just so. A few minutes later, Dr. Lopez called me back into his office and pointed to the images on his computer screen. "You've got advanced osteoarthritis in that right hip," he explained. "The cartilage is almost gone, so your bones are rubbing together. That's why you're in pain." He leaned back in his chair. "You can try physical therapy, but at this stage, it's more about managing the pain until you decide on surgery. And you'll get to a point where surgery's the only real option." I didn't want to hear it, but I knew he was right. I asked him who he'd send his own mother to if she needed this kind of surgery. He gave me the name of Dr. McCarthy, an orthopedic specialist in town. A week later, I sat in Dr. McCarthy's office, looking at another set of x-rays. He explained things in plain language. A total hip replacement means we remove the damaged ball at the top of your thigh bone and replace it with an artificial one. We also resurface the socket in your pelvis with a smooth liner, so it moves without pain. It's a common surgery, and most patients your age recover well. But you shouldn't wait too long. The longer you put it off, the harder recovery can be. I nodded, even though part of me wanted to walk out and pretend I'd never come. He pulled out his calendar. "I've got an opening on the 15th of next month. That gives us time for your pre-op labs and to get you cleared medically. The surgery takes about 2 hours. You'll be under general anesthesia. which means you'll be asleep the whole time." He paused before continuing. "Because of that anesthesia, you can't drive yourself home. The hospital won't even discharge you unless there's someone there to take you. And you'll need someone to stay with you that first night. The first 24 hours are important. If there's a problem, you need help right away." I felt my stomach knot. The surgery part didn't scare me as much as figuring out who would be there afterward. He must have seen the hesitation on my face because he said gently, "Do you have family nearby?" "My son lives in Kansas City," I said. "It's about 4 hours from here." He nodded. "Well, give him the date as soon as possible so he can plan ahead. We want you focused on recovery, not on logistics." I smiled and said I would, but inside I knew it wasn't that simple. Ray had a busy job, 2 kids, and a wife who already had their schedules filled months in advance. Asking them to drop everything to help me wasn't something I liked doing. On the drive home, I thought about just arranging a paid medical transport. It would be easier than trying to work around someone else's schedule. But I also knew the doctor was right. This wasn't just about a ride. I'd need help getting in and out of bed, bringing meals, maybe even using the bathroom those first hours. That night, I sat in my recliner with the heating pad on my hip, looking around the living room I'd kept up all these years. Every picture on the wall, every piece of furniture. I'd taken care of myself since Frank passed. The idea of asking for help felt strange, almost foreign. But I also knew I couldn't avoid it this time. For 2 days after the appointment with Dr. McCarthy, I told myself I'd call Ray. A phone call felt more personal, and maybe he'd hear in my voice that this was important. But each time I picked up the phone, I pictured him at work, checking his watch while I explained, or worse, putting me on speaker with other people listening. Texting felt easier, less of a spotlight. I could keep it short and make it sound like no big deal. I didn't want him or Stephanie thinking I was making a fuss. That Thursday evening, I sat in my recliner, the heating pad humming against my hip, and opened a new message. My thumbs hovered over the keys. I typed a few words, deleted them, and started again. Finally, I wrote, "Surgery's on the 15th. Just need someone to drive me home." It was plain, to the point. No drama. I hit send and watched the message change to delivered, then read. Both of them had seen it. For a moment, a little bubble popped up, typing, but then it disappeared. I sat there, staring at my phone. Maybe they were talking it over, figuring out who would come. Maybe they were checking their schedules. I told myself that was a good sign. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I opened a book, but the words blurred together. My eyes kept drifting back to the phone. An hour later, the screen lit up with a reply. It was from Stephanie. "That's the week we're going to Branson with friends. Can you reschedule?" I read it twice, then a third time, trying to make it make sense. My surgery date wasn't some lunch date I could move around. It was the only slot the doctor had open before spring. I thought about explaining that, but I didn't. I didn't want to sound like I was begging. I set the phone down on the end table and sat there for a few minutes listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The hurt was sharp, but it was the familiar kind, the kind that comes from realizing you're not high on someone's list of priorities. I reached for the phone again and typed, "No problem. I'll figure it out." I hit send before I could change my mind. After that, I put the phone face down. In the quiet, I tried to reason it out. Branson was only a few hours from Springfield. They'd probably planned it months ago. Maybe they'd already put down deposits. People don't cancel trips like that lightly. And Stephanie's parents have a place down there. They go every year. But as much as I tried to rationalize it, the truth stayed there in the back of my mind. This wasn't a vacation I was asking for. It was a surgery, a major one. And I wasn't asking them to stay for a week, just to be there long enough to get me home safe. By bedtime, I'd convinced myself not to bring it up again. If they couldn't or didn't want to come, then I'd handle it, just like I always have. The next morning, I got up, made coffee, and checked my phone. No new messages. I rinsed my cup and thought about the checklist I'd need to make, things to do before surgery, arrangements for someone to check on me afterward, groceries to buy. I'd already decided I wasn't going to lean on neighbors more than necessary. People mean well, but they have their own lives. Part of me wanted to call Ray anyway, to hear his voice, just to see if he'd sound concerned. But then I imagined him apologizing in that distracted way he has already halfway through telling me about a work project. I decided against it. I kept busy that day. Laundry, vacuuming, watering the plants. But every so often, my mind drifted back to that text exchange. It was strange how a handful of words on a screen could make me feel so small. That evening, I made a simple dinner, chicken, green beans, and rice, and ate at the kitchen table. I looked over at the empty chair across from me. I wondered if Frank would have known the right way to ask, the way that would make it impossible for Ray to say no. He had a way of making people want to help, without them feeling like it was an obligation. I didn't have that gift. After dinner, I folded a load of laundry, switched off the lights, and went to bed early. The phone stayed on the nightstand, silent, and somewhere between knowing I needed help and knowing I wasn't going to get it from the people I'd hoped, I made a decision. I'd stop waiting for a reply that wasn't coming. Once I accepted that Ray and Stephanie weren't going to be here, I shifted into planning mode. I've always been that way. If I can't change something, I get practical. The first thing I did was make a list in my spiral notebook. At the top, I wrote, before surgery. Underneath, I started jotting down every task I could think of. Clean the house, do laundry, pay bills ahead of time, buy groceries, prep meals, set up a recovery spot. The house came first. I spent 2 days working through every room. I dusted the shelves in the living room, vacuumed under the couch, and scrubbed the kitchen counters until they shined. The bathroom took the longest. I didn't want to come home from the hospital to find soap scum in the tub or a half-used roll of toilet paper. Next was groceries. I thought about what I'd actually be able to eat after surgery. Dr. McCarthy had told me it would be important to keep my meals simple and easy to prepare for the first week. I bought oatmeal packets, canned soup, yogurt, applesauce, and a few frozen dinners I could just pop in the microwave. I added paper plates and plastic utensils to the cart so I wouldn't have to stand at the sink washing dishes. When I got home, I put everything away in the lower cabinets and fridge shelves I could reach without bending too much. I didn't want to risk pulling on the incision, trying to grab something from the top shelf. The recovery station came next. I moved the recliner closer to the end table, set a small basket there for my phone, charger, reading glasses, and the TV remote. I placed a stack of books and magazines within arm's reach. Beside the chair, I put a small cooler that I could stock with drinks and snacks, so I wouldn't have to get up every time I wanted something. I called my friend Mabel from church. She's in her 70s too, but she still drives during the day. I told her about the surgery and asked if she'd be able to stop by once a day for the first week just to check in. She agreed right away, but said she doesn't drive after dark anymore. That meant I'd need someone else for the evenings, or at least a plan if something went wrong overnight. I thanked her anyway. Having her stop by would be one less thing to worry about. The big problem was transportation. The hospital's rules were clear. They wouldn't release me to a taxi or rideshare. It had to be someone I knew or a licensed medical transport. I pulled out my laptop and started looking up companies in Springfield. The first one I called quoted me $275 for a one-way trip from the hospital to my house. The second was $300. I almost hung up, but the woman on the phone explained it included a driver trained to help patients in and out of the vehicle, plus someone to walk me inside and make sure I was settled. I told her I'd think about it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the printout from the transport company. I kept staring at the number, $300 for what would be a 20-minute drive. But what choice did I have? If I didn't arrange something, they wouldn't let me leave. I booked the service the next morning. The woman took my credit card number and gave me the driver's name and the time they'd arrive. I put the appointment in my notebook and crossed transportation off the list, even though I didn't feel much relief. As the days went by, I worked through the rest of the preparations. I set out loose-fitting clothes for the hospital, soft pants with an elastic waist, a button-up shirt, so I wouldn't have to pull anything over my head. I put extra blankets and pillows in the living room, so I could sleep there if the bed was too uncomfortable. One evening, I pulled my old overnight bag from the closet to start packing for the hospital. I folded the clothes neatly, added toiletries, my phone charger, and a small notebook for writing down anything the doctor told me. At the last minute, I opened the drawer in my nightstand and took out a framed photo of Frank. It was from our 25th anniversary, both of us smiling in front of the little cabin we'd rented at the lake. I slipped the photo into the side pocket of the bag. I didn't plan on showing it to anyone, but I knew I'd want it there. Just something to remind me I'd gotten through hard things before. That night, I sat in my recliner and looked around the house. Everything was in order. The freezer was stocked, the laundry was folded, the floors were clean. I'd done everything I could to make recovery easier. But as ready as I was, the house still felt too quiet. I thought about how different it would be if Frank were here, how he would have cleared his calendar without me having to ask, how he would have been waiting in the hospital lobby the second they wheeled me out. Instead, I had a driver I'd never met and a friend who could stop by in the afternoons. It wasn't what I wanted, but it would have to be enough. I crossed the last item off my list and closed the notebook. The preparations were done. Now all that was left was to wait for the 15th. Ever had to pay for something you shouldn't have had to, just because no one would step up? If you've been there, like and share this story. If you won't, explain why in the comments, because I'm curious how you'd handle it. A week before surgery, I went back to St. Mary's for my pre-op appointment. It was a gray Monday morning, the kind where the cold seems to seep into your bones before you even make it from the car to the door. I signed in at the desk, took a seat, and tried to ignore the couple across from me talking about their winter vacation plans. They called my name, and I followed a young nurse through the hallway into an exam room. She introduced herself as Carla. She had kind eyes, the sort that make you feel like you're talking to someone who's really listening. She checked my blood pressure, took my temperature, and asked me a string of routine questions. Then she glanced at the form in her hands. "Who's helping you after surgery?" she asked. I hesitated, hoping she'd move on, but she didn't. "I've arranged for a medical transport to take me home," I said. "I'll be fine after that." Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. "And someone will be with you for the first 24 hours. I shook my head. "No, my friend Mabel will stop by during the day, but she doesn't drive after dark." Carla set her pen down. "Grace, the first day is important. You'll be groggy from anesthesia. You'll need help moving around, getting meals, making sure you're steady on your feet." "I've handled worse," I said, a little sharper than I meant to. Then I sighed. "My son lives out of town, and they're busy. I don't want to bother them." Carla didn't rush to fill the silence. She just looked at me, patient, like she was giving me time to say more. I didn't. Finally, she said, "Would you like me to call him?" Sometimes family doesn't realize how much help is needed until they hear it from someone medical. I can explain exactly what your recovery will involve." The thought of her calling Ray made my stomach twist. I could already imagine the tone in his voice, half concern, half annoyance, like I'd pulled him away from something important. And I knew how Stephanie would feel about their plans being interrupted. "No," I said, "but thank you for offering." Carla studied me for a moment, then nodded. She didn't press. She went back to her checklist, blood work, medication review, instructions for the night before surgery. When she asked for my emergency contact, I gave her Ray's name and number, the same as always. She wrote it down carefully on the form. I didn't notice until later that she kept a small sticky note tucked inside her clipboard. The rest of the appointment was a blur of explanations. Don't eat after midnight. Take only the approved medications. Shower with the antibacterial soap they'd given me. I tried to focus on each detail, but part of my mind stayed on that moment when she'd offered to call him. When it was over, she walked me back to the waiting area. "You're going to do fine," she said. "But please remember, recovery is easier when you've got someone looking out for you." I smiled and thanked her, but in my head, I was already telling myself the same thing I always did. I can manage. Back in my car, I sat for a minute before starting the engine. I thought about why I'd turned down her offer so quickly. It wasn't just that I didn't want to bother Ray. It was that I didn't want the help to come out of guilt. I didn't want him to show up because someone told him he had to. When I got home, I went over my list again, double-checking that I had everything ready. The medical transport was booked. Mabel would stop by. Meals were stocked, and my recovery chair was set up. On paper, it was all covered. Still, as I moved through the house that afternoon, folding laundry and tidying up, I kept thinking about Carla's face when I told her I'd be alone. She hadn't been judging me, but there was concern there. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, the phone rang. It was the hospital confirming my arrival time for surgery day, 6:30 in the morning. The woman on the line went over the instructions again and asked for my emergency contact one more time. I gave her Ray's information without thinking about it. After I hung up, I glanced at the clock. I wondered if Carla had already made a note somewhere tucked away in my file. I wondered if she'd actually call him, whether I liked it or not. The thought made me uneasy, but I didn't push it away. For the first time since setting the date, I realized I wasn't just afraid of the surgery. I was afraid of what it might show me about the people I thought I could count on, and about the fact that maybe I couldn't. The morning of surgery came before I felt ready for it. I'd hardly slept, waking up every hour to check the clock. By 5:30 a.m., I was dressed in the loose pants and button-up shirt I'd laid out, bag packed by the door. The medical transport van pulled up right on time, the driver polite but quiet. The hospital lobby was bright and already busy when we arrived. At check-in, the clerk gave me a wristband and told me to wait until they called me back. I looked around the waiting area. Nearly every patient had someone with them, a spouse holding their hand, an adult child balancing a coffee cup and paperwork, a friend helping them to a chair. I tried not to stare, but it was hard not to notice the difference. I sat alone, holding my bag in my lap, telling myself I was fine. I'd chosen this. A nurse called my name, and I followed her to the pre-op area. She handed me a gown and helped me tie it at the back. My bag went under the bed, and she started the four. "You nervous?" she asked as she taped the line in place. "Not really," I lied. She smiled like she didn't quite believe me, then said she'd be back in a few minutes. When she left, I closed my eyes and tried to block out the sounds around me. Curtains swishing, monitors beeping, voices calling out medical terms I didn't understand. I reminded myself this was routine. People had this surgery every day, somewhere else in the hospital. I didn't know that Carla was making a phone call she'd decided on a week ago. She'd waited until she knew I was in pre-op, first started, anesthesia paperwork ready. Then she stepped into a corner with my file in hand and dialed the number I'd listed for Ray. He answered on the second ring. "Hello, Mr. Bennett? This is Carla. I'm a nurse here at St. Mary's. Your mother is having her hip replacement today." There was a pause. "Yes, I know she has surgery today. She said she's fine." Carla's voice stayed even. "She is fine right now, but she has arranged to go home alone afterward. That's not safe. She will need help moving, getting meals, and monitoring for complications. This is not optional. Someone needs to be here." I'm told later that Ray's tone changed then. "Wait, she's going home the same day?" "She didn't tell me that." "She's an independent woman," Carla said, "but this is more than anyone should manage alone. If something happens, bleeding, dizziness, a fall, she'll need immediate help. The hospital strongly advises against discharging a patient without someone there." Ray didn't have much to say for a few seconds. Then, "We'll leave right now. It'll take about 4 hours to get there. Check in at the surgical waiting desk. When you arrive," Carla told him, "we'll keep you updated." He must have told Stephanie right after, because she later admitted they'd both been quiet during those first minutes, realizing they'd taken the situation too lightly. Branson could wait. This was his mother's surgery, and he'd misunderstood what it meant. Back in pre-op, I was unaware of any of this. The anesthesiologist came by to go over what to expect: oxygen mask, a few deep breaths, and I'd be asleep. The surgeon stopped in briefly, smiling as he confirmed we were ready to go. I signed the consent form with steady handwriting, telling myself this was just another step, nothing to fear. When the orderly came to wheel me toward the operating room, I folded my hands across my stomach and looked up at the ceiling tiles passing overhead. My heart was steady, but I felt the quiet inside me grow heavier. The hallway into the operating suite was colder, the lights brighter. The smell was sharp, like cleaning solution. A nurse adjusted my blanket, telling me they'd make sure I was warm. I nodded, still convincing myself I was fine. I had done everything to prepare. The house was ready. The food was ready. I would manage recovery just like I managed everything else. What I didn't know was that while I was being positioned on the operating table, Ray and Stephanie were already on the highway, heading south from Kansas City. The trunk of their car held a suitcase, and the back seat was filled with snacks and coffee cups from a gas station. They hadn't told me yet. They didn't want to call in the middle of the procedure, but they were determined to be there when I woke up. The last thing I remember before going under was a nurse's calm voice telling me to take a deep breath. The mask lowered over my nose and mouth, and I counted backward from 10. I reached 7, maybe 6, before the world disappeared. I had no idea that while I slept, the distance between me and my son was getting shorter in more ways than one. It took a stranger to make that call. Let that sink in. If you think family should already know better, subscribe and share this. And if you disagree, the comment section's open. Tell me why. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the steady beeping of a monitor somewhere to my left. My throat felt dry, and my mouth tasted faintly of plastic. My right hip ached in a deep, steady way, but it was different from the grinding pain I'd lived with. It was surgical, sharp, and clean. I opened my eyes slowly. The room was softly lit, the curtain partially drawn around my bed. A nurse was adjusting something on my forepole. "Welcome back, Grace," she said gently. "Surgery went well. Just rest for now." I gave a small nod. She left, and I turned my head slightly toward the movement I'd sensed beside me. Ray was sitting in the chair by my bed. His elbows were resting on his knees, and his hands were clasped like he wasn't sure what to do with them. Behind him, Stephanie stood with her purse over her shoulder, eyes darting between me and the floor. For a second, I wondered if I was still dreaming. The last I knew, they were going to Branson. Ray leaned forward. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "We're here." The oxygen mask made speaking difficult, so I reached for the small whiteboard the nurse had left on the rolling table. My hand was shaky, but I managed to write. "Why now?" Ray read it, exhaled, and rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't realize," he said. "I should have asked more questions. I thought you'd be fine." Stephanie stepped closer. "We honestly thought it was a simple thing," she said, "like getting stitches out or something quick. We didn't know you'd be going home alone right after." I erased the board slowly, the marker squeaking on the surface, then wrote again. "You never asked what I needed." When I held it up, Ray's eyes dropped to the floor. Stephanie pressed her lips together. I wiped the board again and wrote, "You just assumed." They both stood there in silence. The machines kept their rhythm, and the voices of nurses drifted in from the hallway. Finally, Ray said, "You're right. I assumed. We both did. And I'm sorry. We should have been here from the start." Stephanie added, "Carla called us. She told us what it would be like for you when you got home. We got in the car right away. Branson can wait." I set the board down and let out a slow breath through the mask. My hip throbbed, but the ache in my chest wasn't about the surgery. It was about all the other times they hadn't asked, all the times I'd told myself it didn't matter. "You've always been the one who could handle everything," Ray said. "I guess I leaned on that too much. I didn't think about what it might cost you." The words sounded sincere, but I was too tired to know what to do with them. I closed my eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "Mom," Stephanie said gently, "we'll take care of everything for the next week. You just focus on healing. No lifting, no cooking, no worrying about the house. We've got it." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it yet. I'd heard promises before, but something in Ray's expression looked different, less defensive, more present. The nurse came back and then, checking my vitals. "Family?" she asked, glancing at them. "Yes," Ray said quickly. "Good," she replied. "You'll need them. The first 24 hours are the hardest." After she left, I reached for the board one last time. "Thank you for coming." It was the most I could manage right then. My eyelids were heavy, and the anesthesia was still pulling at me. Ray smiled faintly. "We'll be here when you wake up again." As I drifted back to sleep, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't heading home to an empty house right after something big. They were here. And maybe, just maybe, that could mean something more than a single day. Ray and Stephanie stayed at my house that first week after surgery. The first night, they set up camp in the living room, Stephanie on the couch, Ray in the recliner. They brought me water before I asked, kept track of my medications, and made sure I didn't try to get up without help. The next morning, Ray fixed scrambled eggs and toast. He put the plate on the tray next to my chair and said, "You don't have to thank me, just eat." Stephanie drove me to my follow-up appointment 2 days later, navigating the icy streets like she'd been living in Springfield her whole life. At first, I stayed quiet. I was still sorting out how I felt. But by the 4th day, I decided to say what had been on my mind for years. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. Stephanie was loading the dishwasher. Ray had just poured himself coffee. I looked at him and said, "Do you know how lonely it's been?" He set the mug down. "Lonely?" I nodded. "Since your dad died, I've handled everything. Not just the bills and the house. All the repairs, every trip to the doctor, every bad day. I've done it alone." Ray leaned back in his chair, his face serious. "I thought you liked doing things yourself. You've always been the one who could handle anything." "I can handle things," I said, "but that doesn't mean I always want to. It would have been nice to have someone offer without me having to ask. Stephanie stopped at the counter, listening. Ray ran his hand over his jaw. I guess I didn't realize how much you were carrying. I should have checked in more. That's not something you can fix with one visit. I told him. It's about being there, not just when it's convenient. He nodded slowly. I hear you. I'll do better. In the days that followed, they proved it wasn't just talk. Ray shoveled the driveway after a snowstorm without me saying a word. Stephanie reorganized the pantry so I could reach what I needed without stretching. They kept the laundry going, took out the trash, and handled all the errands. It wasn't just the help that mattered. It was the change in how they spoke to me. They asked before assuming, "Do you want me to pick up more milk? Are you comfortable in that chair? Would you like company for your next appointment?" Simple questions, but questions I hadn't heard in years. When they left at the end of the week, Ray promised, "I'll call you every Sunday, and I'm going to come down once a month, even if it's just for the weekend." I didn't argue. I just said, "I'll hold you to it." And for once, he kept his word. The first Sunday after they left, he called while making breakfast for the kids. A month later, he drove down with the grandkids, and we spent the afternoon making cookies. 3 months after the surgery, my scar had faded to a thin, pale line. My limp was almost gone. I could walk through the grocery store without wincing every other step. Life was starting to feel normal again, but something else had changed. I'd learned that asking for help isn't the same as weakness. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. Looking back, I wish I'd spoken up sooner, years sooner. Maybe I would have had more dinners with my son, more weekends where I didn't have to haul bags of mulch into the yard alone. But I can't go back. What I can do is make sure I don't fall back into the habit of staying silent. Now, if I need help with something heavy, I call Ray. If I have a medical appointment, I tell him. And if he can't make it, I ask someone else. I don't apologize for needing it. Sometimes I still feel the pull to say, "I'm fine," when I'm not. Old habits don't vanish overnight. But then I remember that whiteboard in the recovery room and the way my son looked at me when I told him he never asked. That moment shifted something between us. So now, I take a breath and speak up. If you've been the one carrying everything alone, I want to ask you something. Has there been a time when you had to be strong by yourself? And what happened when you finally spoke up? Share it in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story connected with you, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps more people hear these stories. And you never know who might need to be reminded they're not alone.